Welcome to Capsule, where we talk about Swiss wealth management. I'm joined here by Achille Deodato. He's CEO of Indigita.
Good afternoon.
So, Achille, let's talk about cross-border regulations. How have they evolved in the last couple of years?
In the last years, we've seen basically three main trends in cross-border compliance regulations. On the one hand, we've seen that the cross-border regulations have become the more and more complex, meaning that especially European regulators, but not only, have been intensifying the control on financial institutions, including wealth managers, making business in their countries. So we have a trend clearly in the matter of raising awareness by foreign regulators. Then the regulations have become more and more complex, meaning that there are more rules to be followed. And then we have, of course, and therefore controls to be put in place and trainings to be made. And finally, we have a clear trend on the digitization and automation, meaning that the complexity that we are facing now when we are dealing with cross-border compliance regulations is not any longer manageable in a manual way. And that means that there is a lot of data to be treated, a lot of rules to be understood. And the only way, whether we are talking about a small or a large institution, is basically to automate the controls and to digitize the data. So I would say today, if we look at the evolution, the big trend that we are looking at in terms of cross-border compliance regulations is the digitization and automation of controls and processes.
So it has always been a topic, cross-border, especially for bigger banks. But now Swiss wealth managers, the independent Swiss wealth managers, are now FINMA regulated. Why is it going to be so important for them to have a clear focus on that topic?
I would say that history repeats somehow, in the sense that FINMA started looking in a more detailed way to cross-border risks roughly 10 years ago. Obviously, banks came first for a matter of size and of underlying risk. And nowadays that the wealth managers are getting regulated as well, they will also have to go through exactly what banks did, meaning understanding what are the cross-border risks they're facing, then get equipped with the necessary know-how, and then implement the controls and the training for their employees.
What has happened in the key markets where Swiss wealth managers, but also banks, are focusing on?
So traditionally, we can say that Swiss wealth managers have been strongly positioned in neighboring countries. We will talk about Germany, France, Italy, for instance. Not only, but there has been always a very strong position in those markets. Those markets are among the markets where regulators have been strengthening the most the regulations on investor protection, for instance. So we've seen with MiFID II the strengthening of investor protection rules. And a key element that we need all as a Swiss-based companies to keep in mind is that the fact that maybe an advisory contract is signed by a client who's domiciled in Germany, let's say, but the contract is signed in Switzerland and states that the Swiss regulations are applicable, Swiss law, that does not necessarily create a safety harbor for the Swiss wealth manager, because we've seen that in practice there can be an attraction of the foreign regulations when you're servicing a client abroad. So you could have theoretically a German court willing to rule on the service you've been providing to a German client, even though the contract was signed in Switzerland. This means what? It means that regardless of the fact that you are signing contracts in Switzerland as per Swiss regulation, you need to be aware of the regulations of the country where your clients are based in order to at least be aware of the risks and the regulations you need to manage. And this, I think, is something that the most and more Swiss entities are realizing.
So how can they, the smaller asset managers, the independent wealth managers, how can they minimize their risks?
So I will give a bit what in French we call a réponse bateau, in the sense that first of all, in order to manage a risk, you need to identify the risk and to understand the risk. That means that wealth managers will have to first get the data in terms of what are the regulations that they have to follow in the markets where they are active. And to do that, they will have simply to acquire what we call the country manuals, which we are produced by the mother company of Indigita. It's basically an instruction manual where it is explained what are the rules to be followed when you deal with clients domiciled in a specific country. Once they acquire the data, then they will be able to understand where are the risks based on the specific activities they want to carry forward. And once they have identified the risks, then they will have to be equipped in terms of tools in order to control the risks, and as well as in terms of trainings in order to train their managers, their relationship managers, as well as their control functions on how to manage the risks in those specific areas. And in order to do that, of course, they can then have access to automated controls, online trainings, and so on. So it's basically identification of risk, understanding the risk, and then taking the measures.
What are you doing as Indigita in this whole environment, this changing environment?
Indigita is the digital arm of the larger BRP Bizotter and Partners Group. The BRP Group is a leader in cross-border compliance regulations for financial institutions, servicing banks, but as well as wealth managers. What Indigita does, basically we digitize the data of BRP and then we put it at disposal of the clients in order to allow automation and digitization. So we have tools that allow to control cross-border risks and to keep them, of course, to manage them. And then we also have specific trainings. Basically, we cover over 190 countries, both with our control tools and with our trainings for wealth managers.
How does the future look like for Indigita?
When I think at Indigita, well, I like to dream. I'm a bit of a dreamer, but I think that we do have the potential to become a bit the Bloomberg of cross-border, in the sense that being part of a larger group, the entire group is moving into this digitization and automation space. And where Indigita will play a key role is in supporting the group in becoming this central hub for banks and for wealth managers, where they can look into the cross-border, understand what are the rules, manage their own risks, and have as well key risk indicators in place that allow them demonstrating to their auditors and to regulators that the rules are properly managed.
Achille, thank you very much for joining us.
My pleasure.
Thank you very much for watching Capsule, where we talk about wealth management. Stay tuned.